3.2 External projects. This is an introduction to my sketchbook. I like to compile my sketchbooks so that they are visually informative. So I've started this new sketchbook with tutor feedback from project 10 and also my assessment feedback to help guide me. I've then selected some work from 3.1 practice and research and just started to compile some key points from the theme of dyslexia, just as a starting point really, because I always feel that it can be daunting starting new assignments and so forth, but I just feel that this way of working for me really gets me back into the swing and momentum. As we can see, I make use of photographs and bullet points and mind mapping. These were some key pointers from 3.1, which I will later research and possibly select and refine. They're all based around the theme dyslexia. And then as we can see through here towards project 9, I then started to look at my colour and tactility with the body and making use of that as a platform. This actually has pushed my practice to become a textile discipline for knitting. So I need to learn how to knit. So I feel that it's also important, the practical aspect of knitting, which will develop over the duration of studying 3.2, but I also feel that it's going to be important to contextually research the theme. It's not just about knitting patterns, there's a lot of subject matters to cover, and I think there's a lot of information that I can extract and pull out that would bring some new meanings and new key pointers. During the duration of waiting for 3.2 to begin, I dabbled with knitting and looking into it, just starting to collect bits and pieces that I find useful, because this is how I like to work in a sketchbook. Here, for example, because my area of work is going to be knitted textiles with multi-mix media. Some spray paint that was sprayed over a knitted sample, and also as well looking at things like the gauge and scale of knitted stitches, the theoretical side. Moving on, beginning to learn how to knit, I knitted some new materials by hand, so it's also important for me to compile in my sketchbook this note making and bullet pointing as part of my learning process. And the sketchbook almost becomes like an archive. Through here, I wanted to archive the materials that I'd knitted. Again, working with the colours, the tactility here, selecting, sorting and refining how some of the materials are actually engaging and interacting with each other. I think that this is important. Not all of the samples were successful, but there was a lot of possibility during this time of practicing. I'm broadening my materials further and further, so I feel that this really kind of developed with things like wool, thread, and then pipe cleaners, craft wire, and also craft felt. Most of the time it ended up making a thread, joining it, and then knitting the sample. I also looked at translating my materials, things like a foil sheet, and this was interesting because once this was knitted it became rather noisy, and the tactility of that was interesting. Transforming a garment and also altering the colour palette. The ideas of recycling materials started to come into place. Here, silk posters from work, where advertisement campaigns have been shredded, joined together and reknitted. This has pushed ideas of deconstruction and construction, And then this has also, working with this variety of these materials, has started to make me think about playing with the idea of reinforced textiles and textiles in the building industry, where textiles are used, hoardings and canvas overhauls and laying, almost as if textiles then become a protective barrier. Research as well along the way. I'm feeling that my knitting war finds the line of inquiry of abstract and contemporary knitting. So I've been doing lots of research on various books and articles and so forth. And also as well, during this research, I've then began to look at overlaying my materials and see how the materials interact. And it's also bringing the ideas and suggestions of recycling items to reknit. I quite like the idea of recycling it, so this could be a possibility. And also as well, engaging with the feedback from Project 10. I'd looked at dyslexia in education, and I'd worked with colour palettes of primary colours. So what my knitting has actually enabled me to achieve is breaking the boundaries and changing the way that I view colour palettes. So these knitted materials have been quite successful and positive. So this is again going to broaden colour palettes, but I do feel that it's the materials that dictate most of the colour palette. And then up to this point, I've now started to engage in pulling together my knitted samples and just reflecting on these few weeks of hand knitting. I've also progressed further with a knitting machine and looking ways of attaching some of the new materials that I've knitted. So this is the sketchbook up to this point, and this will then continue to another case study of my further progression.